It's Football Friday, and you are tuned in to Across the Line. On this one, we review the recently concluded 2020 Philippines Football League, brought to you by Qatar Airways. What a 2 weeks it's been, Chris. And now we get an opportunity to really look back at everything and assess the impact of what has been an unprecedented time in Philippine football.
It's been an incredible 2 weeks, hasn't it? Loads of different storylines and subplots that we can discuss. We talk about some of the success stories of some of the teams that have really underachieved, some of the clubs that we would expect to be, challenging for titles who did not. Some of the teams that are languishing at the bottom of the table that are certainly ones that we weren't expecting when we initially did our season review. We talk about some of the clubs that under the radar have sort of kept ticking over, and then subtly have worked their way towards, having incredible seasons, even though it was just the 5-game condensed campaigns. But overall, I think what is the overarching theme of this is just how it's been amazing to see everyone club together to produce a really wonderful festival of football for the last 2 weeks, when at so many points during the course of this year we didn't see it being feasible. So it's great for you and I to sit down to discuss and review this great, wonderful 2 weeks of football that we've enjoyed.
So many interesting stories and subplots, and that's exactly what you want in a league, and all the implications and the things to look forward to. We talk about it all on this one, and we hope you enjoyed. If you do, subscribe to our YouTube, Spotify, and on Apple Podcasts. Look for us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and on Instagram. And without further ado, this is our review of PFL season 2020 on this Football Friday. It's been an exciting 2 weeks for the world of Philippine football. The PFL 2020 season, brought to you by Qatar Airways, has just wrapped up, and it was a magnificent 2 weeks, Chris.
Brilliant 2 weeks of football. Really enjoyed it. A whole myriad of surprises, the usual suspects still turning up and ending up victorious, but loads of subplots, loads of underlying stories that I think have been a real surprise package with this particular competition. I mean, there's, we're used to seeing UCFC, obviously the new guys, formerly Ceres, being atop of the podium and being the champion. But the fact that we saw new clubs come in, do so well, the fact that we saw some teams who traditionally have been powerhouses struggle and stutter as we went through this condensed season. Loads of subplots, loads of little stories that we can kind of take away from this condensed season. But I don't know about Eugene, but I really enjoyed watching the shorter season. And it was, although it's a different version to what we're used to, it was still really enjoyable nonetheless.
Yeah, there was a different kind of buzz for this season, and you could really feel it. It was tangible with the fans, with everybody involved in the broadcast, with everybody, all the players. There was a added feeling of relief, but also of gratitude that this actually even transpired. But what I wanted to ask you before we got into things, right? We're going to review this entire season, and as you said, action-packed and so many subplots to speak about. But watching the games, Chris, from the outside looking in, did it stir anything up in you? Did it make you want to come back to club football and perhaps get involved again?
You didn't mention this one off air. You didn't say you were going to bring this one up, did you? You sprung this one on me. I suppose a little bit, if I'm being honest. Like I saw some people who I played alongside participating in the league. Their face a little bit rounder and, their legs not moving as quickly as perhaps they once did, mentioning no names. But the fact that they were out there and engaged and playing, that for me was a victory in and of itself. Do you know what I mean? It was nice to see people just decide to, put the boots on, get dressed and get out there and play and have another crack at it. So I enjoyed that aspect of it. And I'd be lying if I said a little bit of me would love to have participated in the event, and maybe something down the road, it might reignite in me, and I might say, yeah, you know what, I wouldn't mind getting back involved. From the coaching side, I enjoyed the tactical battles and that sort of thing. So I did miss that element of being on the sideline and, obviously watching the games, you think of ways in which you would combat certain, setups or makeups of opponents and stuff. So I was watching it, and I do miss that element of it. but I wouldn't fancy being in a bubble. I've done my international stints, and that being in the hotel for 2-3 weeks at a time, that could be quite difficult. And obviously the uncertainty of everything, the virus, whether it was going to kick off or not, having it amidst, typhoons and storms and whatnot, those sorts of things. When I took a step back, I was like, wow, thankfully I'm not in that type of environment. So no, don't get me wrong. There's always going to be that element. And I think there's always going to be that aspect of it when I'm, 50, 60 years old, the competitive side of me saying, I probably could still play one more season, or, I'd love to be involved just one more time. But I've just enjoyed it, if I'm being honest with you, Gene. For the majority of me has just sat back and enjoyed and relished in the fact that we had another season of Philippine domestic football, because for a long time, Gene, we have to acknowledge the fact that we didn't think this was ever going to happen. So the fact that it went ahead, the fact we were able to proceed with the competition, that for me was the thing that gave me the most, the biggest sense of fulfillment watching those games.
It was more of a spontaneous question, like it needed a real-time response, that one, not like something that you could can, you know what I mean?
Sure, I'll try and put you on the spot as we go through this as well. I'll see if we can elicit some emotional responses from you.
No, I agree with you, and it has been really, how should you say, profound, the impact that it's had on the Philippine football community. And it's really drummed up a little bit of excitement. And I think what it really captured was something that we've spoken about the previous seasons, about the games being good, but nobody could really appreciate them because they weren't packaged correctly. And now we're getting a chance to watch it in an easily accessible place, YouTube, your Facebook. You can cast it on your TV. You can watch it on the big screen, and there's replays. It's palatable, and you get an opportunity to see what the quality is really like. And it's clear now to everybody that the spectrum of quality in the Philippine game is tremendous, right? You have 46 pass goal for UCFC, that kind of quality where they can ping the ball 4 or 5 different times in that sequence from 40 yards left to right, no problem. That kind of football. And you can also see the heart and grit of a Maharlika side that is new and fresh and, like I said, very raw in this top tier. So it's pretty exciting to see those types of dynamics and to see how they interact with one another, right? Maharlika beating Stallion, like an established club for a long time. That story, regardless of what other results transpired from Maharlika in this competition, will live on for a long time and will inspire lots of young kids to maybe participate in the game, right? So I don't want to get too in the nitty gritty in that tunnel right now, but let's give a little bit of a, how should you say, let's just lay out the landscape of what transpired over the 5 weeks. And then, as you mentioned, off air, you want to speak about top performers, perhaps the underachievers of this competition, some of the surprise packages that we've had, and just an opportunity to get around the entire competition. So before we do that, let's give them the layout of the land, so to speak. All right. After everything, you were right, Chris. The champions have been crowned, and they were exactly who you expected them to be. They were untouchable. Unbelievable record. To clinch the title, it was 24 goals scored in 4 matches, 4 straight wins to clinch the crown. Spectacular. You just have to look at the numbers.
I said in the previous preview episode that we had, which would have been back in, I think it was February or so, that I just felt they had too much firepower, and that was again reviewed right before the start of the competition. We even had Bienve at Marignan, and we touched upon this subject again, and I felt that they would go into this competition the most prepared, when there was no preparation possible. And that might sound ridiculous, but I just felt that they were the most professional of all of the clubs, with the most professional individuals who don't need to be under the guidance of a coach or be under the guidance of a club, overseeing their, what's the diet, what's the nutrition, what's the weight program, are they doing stuff? These individuals, you don't need to tell them to keep fit. You only have to listen to the podcast that we did with Bienve. He's going on holiday just to recharge the batteries so he comes back fitter. Not to go on vacation, to get blasted and, eat what he wants and, get up to silly antics. It's all about the football. Everything's about the football. And you talked a little bit there about the spectrum, and that was actually one of the things I was a little bit disappointed with, was the fact that some of the teams who, I would expect them to have performed better given their status, given their more professional experience, but it took them too long to get going. And in a 5-game season, at the end of the day, the professionalism was what was found wanting from some of those clubs. And it was the continued heightened level of professionalism of UCFC that shone through. And, again, the other thing that we talked about with their firepower, we touched upon their defensive frailties, but other than the final game against Kaya with a relatively depleted squad that they put out, no one was really able to lay a glove on them. They just had too much firepower. Teams were reluctant to go out and press them, which meant that the players with guile, with creativity in that final third, were able to expose people. Some great shots from distance. We saw some great goals from outside the 18-yard box because they've got that quality. Then teams that invariably try to press them, they got picked off. In those rare moments where teams try to get after them, it was 1-2 pass combinations, getting behind it. And once you give space to players like Robert Lopez Mendy, to OJ Porteria, to players who've got great movement like Bienvenu Marignon, it's game over. It's game over. So you have to take your hat off to them because it was an easy prediction when you look at it on paper. But at the end of the day, they still had to go out there and deliver. And my gosh, did they.
Yeah, I think the biggest shame is the fact that it didn't get stretched to the last day, the title race. I mean, that was one of the bigger disappointments in that there was nothing really on the line when Kaya and United City faced off on that final day. The trophy had already been secured in the previous match day when Kaya failed to beat Mendiola. That was a scoreless draw and probably the biggest disappointment in the campaign of Kaya. Just really no excuse for not being able to beat Mendiola, who leaked a lot of goals with previous opponents. But just focusing in on United City, tremendous performance. And as you said, they didn't need any extra motivation. There were so many rumblings prior to the start of the competition about, they're not training hard, their coach is not here, there's no direction. And then they step out on the pitch and you guys are just on the back foot the entire time. And they're making adjustments as to how they're going to penetrate your deep block. And it's just it's just clockwork. It's like, essentially, if you associate it into a boxing match, it's like you're on the ropes and you're on the defensive for however long they want you to be. Eventually, it's going to get tiresome, right? You're just out there worried about what you're going to get hit with. You're tense the entire time. And eventually, you start showing spaces in your defense, and they pick it off so quickly. And
I think what's interesting, what you said about there, Jing, is it's going to sound a bit strange, but I think you have to give a lot of props to Coach Risto on this one, because although he wasn't there, a lot of what you said is, I think because they were so well drilled in the previous years under Coach Risto, a lot of it was just automatic, right? So a lot of their movements, the ball rotations, the movement from side to side was automatic, and that's not to give Coach Frank to do him a disservice, because he stepped into the breach and he easily could have gone in there and said, right, I want to impose myself, I want to impose my style, my way of thinking, etc., etc. But I think for the most part, he just took a backward step and said, look, let's just continue in the manner in which we're going. And, we'll try to adjust on the fly and give the players the responsibility to do that when they're on the pitch, if they have to. Mm. And, I think that shows, especially with Coach Risto, like almost the role of the coach is to make yourself obsolete. Do you know what I mean? To have them so well drilled that they can function without you being there. And I think that's something that really resonated with me when you watched them play, was just how seamless that transition was, excuse me, from having that team as Ceres under Coach Risto to the UCFC team he had under Coach Frank. And yet they still managed to replicate the type of performance that you've seen for the past 2 or 3 seasons under the old Ceres banner.
Yeah, 100%. And now the challenge for them is to keep the squad together, because I think as a Filipino football fan, you are extremely excited to see these guys perform on the Champions League level. You want to see that dominant football. Can they implement it on the bigger stage, right? Or how do they match up against teams from Japan, Korea, and the like, right? So that's definitely an exciting prospect for everyone, not just UCFC fans or Ceres fans previously. I think for everyone, you got to keep a close eye on that because everybody's measuring themselves to UCFC here domestically. You want to know if what you're aiming for is actually effective at a higher level, right?
Well, what's your take on it, Gene? Like, if you were to give your perspective on them obviously progressing through now to the Champions League group stage, whereas before they were getting to that final hurdle, the third qualifying round, and unfortunately came a cropper in the last 2 years. How do you think they'll stack up based on what you've seen in the last few weeks in the current PFL league?
I think they're going to be a very exciting package to look at, right? I think maybe progressing through to the knockout rounds, you wouldn't bet on it, but I don't think it's impossible, right? Because they played against these sides on the final rung prior to getting into the group stage, and they pushed those teams to the limit. And that was with a crazy schedule and a lot of uncertainty about, arranging your visas and late night flights and not being able to train when you get there, right? It's like, that is about as home field advantage as you can get, those Champions League qualifiers. So they were definitely put at a disadvantage in those spots. But in a proper group stage setting, it might be difficult for those guys to travel to the Philippines, right? And to play on our pitches in our stadium. So they might have a huge advantage in that regard. So it's going to be very interesting. And I think that's something that we definitely want to keep our eye on. Like, this beautiful, attractive football, do we want to aspire to that? Because if we, is it worth spending all our time trying to be like them? Because a lot of teams will be trying to copycat the winners, the best of this region, right? Which is Ceres or United City. If you pattern your approach, will it be effective at the Champions League level? That's something that I think is very intriguing to footballing minds here in the country.
Very excited to see the prospect of having, like you said, these big Chinese Super League teams coming to the Philippines, getting these big Japanese powerhouses. It's going to be amazing. Like, I'm really excited to see. I'll be interested to see where they play their games. Obviously, that's something that's still a little bit up in the air. Would John Buck Motors fancy going to Carmona to play some games, with the stench of horses and, whatnot up there? I'm not too sure if they'd fancy it. So I agree. I think that could be a really interesting sort of side note to that competition and them qualifying for it. And I agree. I mean, you've obviously seen some of the teams that they've had battles with over recent years, some of the likes of JDT going into that competition. I think you'll see obviously some of the other teams from Southeast Asia now be able to make that jump into the group stages of the Asian Champions League as they make the competition broader at its base. So it'd be quite interesting to see how some of those teams fare, because I think the likes of JDT, Ceres, maybe some of the top Indonesian clubs, some of the other teams, the upper end of that Southeast Asian bracket, they're probably too good for the AFC Cup. Certainly in this region. I'm not saying necessarily from the other zone. But I would like to see them try to make that step up now and see if they can continue to push their development, because the ascension of Ceres under its previous guys was really rapid. They went from not qualifying, getting into the group stage, qualifying at the group stage. The following year they were Asian champions.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? That ascension was really quick. So if they can continue on that trajectory, who's to say that they couldn't establish themselves on that stage quite quickly? And what would that mean for me would probably be them obviously qualifying for knockout rounds. Yeah. And again, that for me would sound quite ludicrous. But if you'd have asked me 7-8 years ago, is it ludicrous that a Philippine team from the UFL could potentially compete at the ASEAN stage? I'd be like, they would never, no team's going to beat JDT, the amount of money they've got and the funds at their disposal, the infrastructure, et cetera, et cetera. And lo and behold, they did it within 2-3 years. So I'm excited to see what would happen. But I think one of the keys that you mentioned that's really, really important is obviously keeping that squad together and figuring out how they can move with that level up, because obviously there's a lot of players in that squad that are great on a domestic level, but they're going to need to freshen up that squad if they intend to compete on the Asian stage. So yeah, interesting to see how that will develop. But I know a lot of the Philippine football public are going to be really keen to see them pit their wits against the best in Asia.
Manny Ott versus Andres Iniesta, Rizal Memorial Stadium. Come on. I'll come to watch that.
Yeah, for sure.
So yeah, United City, that's what they're looking ahead to. And congratulations to them on a fantastic performance. Second place, right below them, finishing just a point behind because they won the last game, are Kaya FC Iloilo. Now, you have them under your underachievers for this season, right, Chris?
Yeah, I think Kaya's always got to look at themselves as title contenders, right? Every year they've got to set up the same target, which is just, they've got to win the title. And obviously in recent years, you've come up against a very dominant Ceres, now UCFC side. So that's been very difficult. And obviously this is the third year in a row finishing runner-up. So it's always kind of been there or thereabouts. So, the silver medal on the face of it probably isn't that bad of a result. But, I mean, you've got to take the results somewhat in isolation, so like the Ceres, so the UCFC win in the final game of the season was, UCFC put out a weakened team, didn't put out their full selection of players at their disposal, rotated the squad, gave some other guys some opportunity, and obviously ran out 2-1 victors in that particular game. But there was nothing riding on the game. So that's not to take anything away from them, because they have to beat the opponent that's put in front of them. But obviously what we were hoping for, I say we, probably the league as a whole, to take my Kaya hat off as a fan, we wanted to see that to be the showpiece event of the competition. We wanted to see a game when it was Kaya against UCFC, fighting it out for the title with a battle royale. That's what we all wanted, right? That's why the fixtures were made how it was made, and we anticipated that being the case. So the draws against Stallion and a late goal, and obviously the Mendiola one was the big surprise result really of the competition after UCFC had handily beaten them in the early round. I guess it just left Kaya fans, fans of the league as well, just a little bit disappointed with the campaign not having it all go down to that final game and have it go to the wire. Because I think had it been that way, I think you've seen in previous years, and obviously historically, Kaya have been great in those one-off games. Historically have been able to rise to the occasion. And even if you look at the cup final last year, it was really unfortunate. It was a really unfortunate defeat. They easily could have taken that game into extra time, maybe penalties. Because I thought the second half they were the better team, and that was a missed opportunity then. And I think this was a missed opportunity here in this campaign. A shortened season, limited time for all teams to prepare. I just felt that, they fell foul to opponents who, they should be beaten regularly. I'll put Mendiola in that bracket, no disrespect. And against a difficult opponent in Stallion, they were there for the taking. They were there last 10 minutes, 1-0 up. You've got to go for the jugular in that instance and see the game out. So, I put them in the underachievers bracket, and it's not nice to see my former club be placed in that situation. But ultimately, obviously, every year you want to be gunning for the title, and this was an opportunity missed, unfortunately, for the club.
It's incredible. 2020, they didn't lose a single game. Kaya didn't lose not once, not in the AFC Cup, not in the PFL, but ultimately 1 or 2 draws. That was what it cost to not get your goal, unfortunately. The Mendiola and the Stallion one in particular, though, those were very, very painful. And then, of course, you touched upon one thing that perhaps everybody wanted to see was that big match, right? Good viewership still. I was watching some of the Singaporean league games, and you get maybe some games 30 people, some games maybe 200, 300. This was 1,000 over YouTube alone. People were watching, and a couple thousand over on Facebook. So it was still well watched. However, as you said, it wasn't the juggernaut that it could have been. But Kaya still beat the team that was in front of them, which they failed to do in the Copa Paulino Alcantara the year prior, which was a weakened Ceres side. So there was still a job to be done. But in the end, it's just a consolation. 1 point away from something.
Sorry, Jane. Can you put your finger on what you think it is, or what you think it was, that sort of caused that sort of stutter, that sort of, I don't want to say misfiring, because I think that becomes a loaded question. Excuse the pun. What can you put any finger, like, is this something? Was it something in the preparation? Was it something behind the scenes? I don't know. Like, what's your sort of take on why, for whatever reason, Kai weren't able to put up a stronger fight?
I think it's an interesting. When I look at it, it's more of a strategic gamble that played into the favor of United City, right? I'm going to play my strongest 11 and I'm going to kill everybody with my strongest 11 and I'm not going to take any chances. What they managed to do with that approach was kill off matches so early that they didn't have to get tired legs at the end of 90 minutes. That was their goal. And I think it worked out well for them. Where that might fall short is on final day, when you're getting pressed a little bit harder by Kaya or pushed a little bit harder and some of the legs fail and you're forced to throw in 2 or 3 substitutes who are untested over the course of the tournament and thrown into the fire against a Kaya side that is a little bit deeper than you, you might go on and lose the final game, that mammoth match which is played at a high intensity. Kaya, I think, were saving some legs for that potential matchup, thinking, and perhaps rightly so in my mind as the coaching staff, that some of your options on the bench could provide you the necessary firepower to get over the likes of Mendiola and Maharlika, and to shuffle your lineup a little bit to ensure that for the final game, you are the freshest you could possibly be. There are some more seasoned individuals like Simone Rota, for example, that you have to worry about his legs, right? Masanari wasn't fit for that game. So you're also thinking about how do you give Maru rest in midfield? There are things like that they were considering. But I think ultimately, because there was some misfiring in front of goal, there were a lot of opportunities that were missed that didn't play out. I mean, if you score the goals against Mendiola or a referee doesn't call or calls the penalty rather than not calls the penalty or does not disallow a goal, Kaya could be fresher going into a massive game, and we wouldn't be having this discussion. In fact, we would be talking about, oh man, what trust he showed in his squad that he could rotate them even in big matches like Stallion. He left the big defender off. But no, not all. There's a price to risk, and unfortunately, we saw the price. It could have very easily been, how could you just trust all your 11 to United City and not give your younger guys a chance? Now this guy is injured or that guy is injured or he pulled up with cramps 25 minutes into the game. So it could have very easily been that way, and it's useless to think of what ifs, but that's how it transpired. And I think that played into it for sure. The rotation played into your capability to be more fluid in your attack. There's no getting around that. Do I think the players on the pitch should have gotten the job done? I think so. And I think they will look at themselves and feel the same way.
Yeah, I mean, I really, really like Coach Yu. As a player, he was a great player to play against. His teams have always played great football as well as a coach. So, hindsight is always 20/20, isn't it? You've always got your critics who are going to jump on it. As soon as they see the result, they're going to point to whatever methodology that you used. If you don't come up victorious, it was because of that. If you won, then you get to take the plaudits. I mean, that's just the nature of being the coach. So, there are many a game where I'd get, why did you leave this guy on? Why did you not sub this guy in? I think this guy could have made an impact. And listen, that's the nature of the job that you're in as a coach. You live and die by the decisions that you make. So ultimately, if you do pull it off, you are the genius. You're the hero. If you don't, then you're going to be made a scapegoat for the decisions that you took. And I don't necessarily. I don't mind the rotation. It wouldn't be my approach. That's not how I did it. I was often criticised for my best team every week and not creating an environment where some of the guys on the bench weren't always fully trusted. And I guess the flip side to that is, if you were in my starting 11, you knew that 100% I was behind you and I had total belief in you. So that's the flip side to that, right? And there's always the other side of the coin. So I'm sure that as a squad player, I'd be much happier to be playing in an environment under Coach Hugh, where you know you're going to get an opportunity, you know you're going to get a chance. So every approach is different, and that for me wasn't actually too much of an issue. My thing with Kaya is, when I first came, we lacked a striker. We lacked that out-and-out number 9. Nate Berkey was trying to lead the line, but he, for me, was more of a leak man, target player. He needed someone to play off of him. He wasn't necessarily a natural finisher, but he was more the hold-up man. He could set things off, be a focal point for attack, more like an Olivier Giroud type. Do you know what I mean?
I was going to say Emil Heskey, but...
Emil Heskey, yeah, okay, fine. Slightly different, but
I don't know why that came to my head. I don't know why.
I'll tell Nate next time you called him Emil Heskey.
Hey, I love watching that guy.
So I remember like conversations that I had with subsequent coaches, and then obviously when I came in to be head coach, I was like, look, we need a number 9. We need someone who he's not in the game. He doesn't touch the ball. Before you know it, bang, bang, we win the game 2-0 out of nothing. Someone just clinical, ruthless, doesn't need 5-6 chances to put the ball away. And I don't think they had it this season. I don't think they had that guy. Conchero Daniels had a great season. Do you know what I mean? I think he had a really, really, really good campaign. But he does other things for the team. He's not somebody who operates within the confines of an 18-yard box. He's got different attributes, which means he's coming short for the ball. He's making runs in behind. He's hugging the touchline. He's working in off the line. And that's a lot to expect from someone who you're then going to move into a central position and then say, right, I want you to try and grab all the goals. Looking back to, Pablo Arasil, Tishan Hanley, Louis Clark, Robert Lopez Mendy, Jordan Minter last year. I mean, these guys are guaranteed goals. Guaranteed goals. Every season, in and around the top scorer charts, and just need one chance, and it's a goal. Obviously, you had Yusato was your go-to guy for that particular role, but obviously when he left in that off period, that meant that there was just a void in that striker position. So obviously, Osei came in that in the 4th game, which was the Mendiola game, right? The game that he made his debut, who I guess was brought in to perform that function. But unfortunately, he didn't have that opportunity. I know he had injuries in early on in the campaign, so I'm not sure if there was a fitness issue there, Jing. Perhaps you could shed some light on that. But yeah, that for me was the biggest one. It's just they didn't have that killer instinct versus which Kaya has been traditionally been able to find, certainly over the last 4 or 5 seasons, is having that number 9 with that killer instinct, is be able to provide goals that, with half a chance, bang, it's in the back of the net.
Yeah, I think what was visibly different perhaps were the quicker exchanges in the final third, maybe a more of a willingness to pass the ball in tight spaces, but a focal point at the top, as you mentioned, was definitely something that was not as visible, and that clinical nature in front of goal was definitely, you can tell from the statistics alone, just solitary goals in all of the games, if there were goals, and the only time they scored 2 was against United City in that final match. So goals, definitely something to add to the repertoire of Kaya if they are to improve next season. But as I mentioned, undefeated AFC Cup, undefeated in the PFL, fell short of the goal. What's your verdict? Let's say first year of Coach Yu Hoshide at the helm for them, and as you can see, there's been some changes with the way the team is played and maybe the culture of the squad. So how do you see it from the outside looking in?
See, it's very hard to tell, because on the surface he's had a full year, but in reality he's had a very short period of time to stamp his authority on the team. Even if you look at the AFC Cup games he had at the start of the year, he had very little preparation time with that.
Yeah.
So I think it's going to take time for him to get the type of players that he wants. Obviously, he had his striker, and then that whole dynamic was shifted. So I'm not too judgmental on him. I think the key is obviously having a full campaign where he can really implement his philosophies and ideas. Because, like I said, I look at his JPV team that he had before, and they played incredible football. Was brilliant in that transfer market as well, in terms of attracting players of a higher level, a higher standard of foreign player to what we were used to here in the Philippines. I look at guys like Yusato at the time was, arguably the best striker in the league. His first season, he was his absolute revelation. Takashi Odawara, he was brought in, I think, even around the same time that he came in. But I mean, he turned him from a decent Division 2 player to be an absolute Division 1 standout performer, and then brought in Yanagawa, who was absolutely phenomenal in this competition. So perhaps with a transfer window and the opportunity to bring some more of his own guys in, additional time to actually work functionally with the group. I think that's really when we'll be able to judge what he brings to the table. But we'll have a great opportunity to start next year with some Champions League qualifiers. So if that doesn't work out, then obviously we'll go back into the AFC Cup competition, and maybe he get a full campaign there, because I'm sure he was disappointed not to get a full campaign this season. But it's definitely a case of just hoping that he can get the opportunity and have the tools at his disposal to fully implement his styles and his ideas. Because I think if he can do that, then I'm excited to see the brand of football that the side can produce, providing that he gets those right pieces of his jigsaw in place.
Yeah, you mentioned JPV. I think that's a very interesting thing to think about for a lot of people, because JPV was a team that was punching above its weight, right? And I think in this competition, we saw a team that was really capable of doing that, or really surprised a lot of people, raised a lot of eyebrows because they were punching above their weight, right? And that team is the Azkals development team in this 2020 season. Now, Coach Yu Hoshide, let's push him aside for a little while. 8 games only this season, so hopefully he gets more in the next campaign. But speaking of ADT, I think what we saw, or at least I'd be interested to hear what you think, actually, Chris. From what I saw, it was a team that was very, very well organized. I think they were superbly coached in how they were going to approach the game. So there wasn't much thinking going on the pitch. The players knew exactly what they were supposed to do. And if you didn't perform your function, you were going to get replaced. You were going to get yanked off very quickly, and there was somebody else who was going to get put in your spot. On paper, the names are not that impressive, right? They're okay. They're untested. But what they showed on the pitch was that they only got narrowly defeated by UCFC and Kaya. And then they went on and started beating some sides that were well established, right? Who did they beat first? Was it Mendiola? They defeated, and then that was 2-0. Harvey Gayoso scoring 1 and assisting 1, and then they went on to beat Maharlika pretty handedly. I think that was 5-0 in the end that they beat Maharlika, and then they had to play Stallions. Yeah. And that game, you'd expect, all right, this is the time for the big boys to stamp their authority. And then, no. ADT, again, getting a victory, and 3 wins in this competition nobody was predicting that. And I think that's the reason why, perhaps, of all the teams that were upset that United City, outside of Kaya, that were upset that United City didn't put out a strong team in that final game, it would be ADT and Kaya who would be upset, because Kaya wanted to play a strong side. Perhaps neutrals also wanted to see a strong side, but ADT wanted to finish second in this campaign, and they would have wanted United City to play a strong squad. But that aside, very impressed with how they were able to utilize their tools, right? A lot of homegrown players in this, and a lot of very young guys, but they stepped up to the plate and really delivered, I thought, in this competition, which links to JPV and Coach Yu Hoshide, because well-coached sides with okay pieces, or not necessarily world-class pieces, still trump world-class pieces who are badly coached. I think that's what we're seeing with ADT. So it's important to get the coaching correct, to get your approach correct, and then try to improve the pieces at your disposal, not so much hunt for pieces that are really, really good and hope for the best. Does that make sense, Chris?
Yeah, I would agree to that to some extent. I think what's really interesting about this team is the fact that if you look at the majority of the sides, they've got key foreign players that make the difference for that club. Like Bienvenu Marignon, for example. No one can deny his influence on that UCFC and previously Sarah's team. You only have to look back to Kaya in previous years, Jordan Minter, Robert Lopez Mendy. These guys are coming in and completely changing the dynamic of the organisation. ADT don't have that luxury. They don't have that luxury. So they have to make do with the parts that they've got. Now, who's to say if you want to get 2 or 3 foreign players and add them into the mix for that particular opponent? I think they would be bona fide title contenders. I really do. Not that they could win it, and not that it would mean that they would go on to qualify for the Champions League or anything like that. And not that they would do it because it would defeat the purpose. But I think that's just to show and to illustrate just how close they are to potentially being a really, really top side. And that's not to say that they're not. I would argue that if there was like a power rankings, I would probably have them at number 2. I'd probably have them at number 2 because, one might argue that had UCFC put out their strongest lineup with the mood that they were in, maybe they blow out Kaya. It wasn't like Kaya was pulling up any trees. They'd drawn the previous 2 games. If I want to play devil's advocate and say, let's say Sarah's go 5 for 5, they win the entire competition, then we would be having a different conversation. We'd be talking here with ADT sitting in the runners-up spot. So I totally agree with what you're saying there. Like, I'm sure that, a lot of the fans and me as a spectator would love to have seen that UCFC and Kaya game being against 2 fully formed squads, because as a spectacle it makes more sense, but also as a byproduct of that, ADT would have had a better chance of obviously qualifying in that, finishing in that second position. Going back to your organisational perspective, what I noticed about Scott, having worked with him, is he's very good at sort of layering things one on top of the other. So you might have like a base concept that you're working on. So it might be how you want to play. And he was very good at saying, right, this is how I want you to play. And just giving it to you as a blanket. These are the things that I'm looking for. And then within the next session or within a meeting, it'd be right, now add this onto it. Now add this onto it. And they're all very simple ideologies. They're not anything too crazy or far-fetched, very easy to understand, very digestible. And the way in which he does it is very clever. And I think once you start to add these layers on, that's when you start to construct this very formidable organization that's very cohesive. And if you're looking at it from a defensive standpoint, it makes it very, very difficult to break down. Even in a short period of time, you only have to look back to sort of the first games that he had with the national team. You look at how difficult that team was to break down, even in the first 2-3 games that he had. And then on the flip side of that, I was quite impressed with how well he was able to implement his in-possession style of football, because I think that's harder to implement, especially with the quality of player at his disposal, because it wasn't like he had full international players. He had a lot of college players or guys just out of the college ranks, some sort of up-and-coming guys who want to try to forge their way within the game. And again, was able to get them on the same page, playing a system that they all understood. And man, they were, for me, the biggest surprise of the competition in terms of the results that they got. But if I'm being wholly honest, not surprised at all with how quickly they were able to adapt to Scott's ideas, because I've seen it happen. I guess where the only concern I had was when you're working with national team players, they have an elevated football IQ, right? So they're able to pick up the concepts a lot quicker. So you can layer those things a lot quicker. Plus, if you're in a training environment, like a short camp, you layer in that, day in, day out. Whereas this, it's, with a club environment, you're usually able to do it over a consistent period of time. But obviously then this actual scenario was quite similar to a national team camp, because it was in the hotel after a game. You can sit down, you can analyse the game, you can talk about it. So So that layering aspect was very similar to what you had with the national team. It was just a question mark for me whether or not they would be able to process that information quickly enough and then have it translate to performances on the field. But lo and behold, they seemingly got better as the competition went on, won 3 on the bounce for their last 3 games. And I really hope that they continue with this venture, because I think if they go into this next year, which it seemingly will continue, I think they're going to be a real problem. I think it could be a real problem for some of the other teams in this competition moving forward.
I think everybody's got a close eye on ADT because everybody's rooting for them, right? You want them to do well in the SEA Games next year. You want them to do well in terms of getting more numbers from that younger team into the national squad and seeing how they integrate at a higher level, right? For you, who were the standouts in this competition throughout the 5 games that they played?
Yeah, there was a lot made out of, obviously, the poster boy, Harvey Gayoso. His switch then culminated in a couple of goals. So all of a sudden, like you said in the previous podcast, this vindication of everyone agreeing that Harvey was this superstar striker and that he should be playing in different positions. But I think we've already touched on the fact that we think it's great that he's tried out these different positions and had his strings to his bow. So for me, he was a standout performer, but obviously not in the different positions and the different setups that he's used to. But the Matthew Custodio one was one that you raised in last week's podcast, and he's got all the trappings of being a really, really good footballer. Another one I've seen from a really young age, and I was always nervous with him because he was someone who had a lot of hype as a kid, and then seemingly he sort of disappeared as you go into that college setup. And it's very hard for me to gauge how accelerated one's development is when you see them in that type of environment, because I think it's easy to get lost in that college environment. But he's shown in this competition that he's capable. Utilised at the back, but I know he's played in a number of different positions, and really showed his court vision and his field understanding. I think having played in different positions, he was able to sort of use that bank of knowledge that he's acquired and utilise that in a position that he hasn't necessarily been too accustomed to. So I think he's got a great opportunity now to really progress. And he wasn't one really on the radar to maybe make a step up into the under-23s and play regularly, maybe at a major competition like the SEA Games. But he's somebody who could feasibly play on a national team one day. I really do believe that. So he's someone I think, he's got the physicality. It's great to see a young homegrown player come through the ranks and participate at that level. So he's one who I think has really gone onto people's radar as someone who might be able to potentially break through to the national team one day.
And in a spot that is key right now. There is a need for a center back. There aren't too many out there, especially homegrown, that can compete for that spot. So Matthew Custodio, from, as you said, the wilderness of the national team setup, all of a sudden in prime position to capitalize because of this 5-game tournament, right? And that's why it's so important. A lot of people were questioning the validity of spending so much effort and time and money to put this competition on. But we are seeing the benefits of that, and Matthew Custodio is one of them. Harvey Gayoso, I wanted to touch on because he played in central midfield when he finished the competition. But somehow, some way, he works his way into the headlines, scored a penalty, assisted. He's always finding himself involved. And I think the most important thing is the fact that he's not getting carried away with the hype around him. He's not getting carried away with himself. He's continuously improving and trusting in the system. And I think he did well in that regard. Regardless of all the attention on him, he's found a way to make his mark and be a key to some of the success that ADT experienced during the competition. So ADT definitely a surprise package and some very exciting things to look forward to for them. But on the flip side of the surprise packages are the ones that were surprisingly bad. And I think there's one team in particular that will jump out to everyone. We are recording this on a Wednesday, and there is still going to be one more match to be played. Mendiola versus Stallion are going to go up against one another, and that's going to be taking place on Thursday, a day after this is recorded. But Mendiola's got 4 points. And they're up against a Stallion team that has just 1 point after 4 matches. Chris, could you have ever foreseen that that was even possible? Stallion Laguna, a team that were once champions, a team that are perennial contenders, and really a team that was looking to break into, sort of that, okay, with Global gone, with Meralco gone, it's time for us to be a contender. Kaya, ourselves, and Ceres. But they're at the bottom of the table, Chris. They have not been able to implement themselves or express themselves in any shape or form that we are grown accustomed to with regards to Stallion Laguna.
I think even before the season, there was a lot of talk about them potentially challenging for the title, wasn't there? I think the murmurs that were coming out their camp was that they're ready to mount an assault. We talked about it on our podcast, didn't we? We said that we expect the big three to be the big three. That's what we thought. The teams who historically have been there or thereabouts, we expected them to be at the pinnacle of the league and fighting it out for the title. I mean, even conversations that I've had with the likes of Shockey before, he's like, God, every time we play against Stallions, it's always a tough game. We're always so nervous going into them. We know it's a potential game that we could lose. And to see them get rocked 10-0, 10-0, right?
Yeah. No. 7-1. I think it was the
7-1. Sorry, 7-1 against. Because it was quite tight up until half time. 7-1, 10-0 was the Mendiola game. Just to see, obviously, this, like you said, before the penultimate game, and this has been recorded the day before they play Mendiola, but to see them at the bottom of the table is incredibly surprising, because usually you expect a level of consistency, don't you, from Stallions, that they're going to fight, they're going to be scrappy, they're going to be hard working, they're going to be diligent in carrying out the game plan. But 1 point from 4 games, and there could be repercussions of that, because the third place finish obviously could potentially lead to qualification for the AFC Cup. So, it's really, really important that they clinch it, because it's something that they've been harbouring and yearning for such a long time, getting that spot. I remember when we beat them the year we won the Cup, and I know that they felt that year that it was their chance. Ceres at the time had gone out of the competition, and they felt if they could get past us in the semi-finals that they would beat David Aguilas in the final. And I knew when we beat them, they were devastated, because they felt that was a great opportunity for them to play AFC Cup football. And this was their best opportunity. This season was their best opportunity. It still might come to fruition. Like I said, you might be listening to this and think, oh, they've made it. So what's the big deal? But we don't know yet, based on when we record this episode. But I would like to see them there, because I think if you look at their body of work over the period of X amount of years that they've been in this competition, they've always been a consistent performer. So for them to lose out this season would be a real travesty for them. But, although the league table maybe does lie this season, if they end up in that position where they don't qualify, then they've only got themselves to blame. I don't know if you have a difference of opinion, or I don't know if you've got some inside knowledge from watching the games, if you have a different perspective, but it certainly doesn't seem to be the Stallion team that I'm used to seeing, that's for sure.
I didn't see the fire. Normally there's like a fire with Stallion, where they're shouting at each other, they're pumping themselves up. And unfortunately for Kaya, it was visible in that match. That was the only time you saw it. Mm-hmm. I called their other games and they weren't the same. And I think it was the fact that, Kaya and them have so much history together that kind of spurred on some of the players. But for the other matches, they couldn't get up for it. And it was a shame to see, because they could finish below Maharlika, Chris. And that is just a slap in the face of a team that has been around for so long and has set a standard. And now they're not even gatekeepers. If you lose below Maharlika, you have essentially been overstepped, as you're at the bottom of the food chain now. That's embarrassing for them. There's no other way to put it. You're gonna look at a guy like Ernie Nienes and he's gonna be livid, right? Natasha Alquiros, who I commentate with, no longer officially part of Stallion, she is devastated. to see this. You know what I mean? I try to complain about Kaya, underachieving this year, and she just like, don't talk to me about that. Like, don't even try, because Stallion are just in a drastic state right now, and that's probably one of the things that will be very exciting to see for next season. Is what do they do? Do they clear out? Do they what change do they need to make in order for them to be taken seriously again, or be a serious contender next year? That is going to be a big challenge for them, because this year, not good enough. At this stage of the competition with 1 point, it's a sad thing to see, because we're seeing now a decline, right? 2017, they weren't great. 2018, we saw them try to put up a fight. 2019, they were only 4 points ahead of Green Archers, right? So, and now they're at 1 point after 4 games. So if they keep moving in this direction, man, we should start implementing relegation. Maybe Stallion would be in that fight, because it's becoming alarming. Definitely.
That's fighting talk. I wouldn't start with this, because once you start to poke the bear, then you're in for some sort of rebuttal next year for sure.
I'm part of Kaya, Chris, but I'm a Philippine football fan. So make it so that Stallion get angry, man. Everybody needs it.
Because they shouldn't be down there, should they? They're a team with stars on their jerseys. You know what I mean? They should be fighting up at the top of the competition. Quite a lot of time and respect for them. We used to have some great games. Some of the fondest memories that I have as a player and as a coach were games against them. Because they were always such a fiery and intense game. So I just hope they can find that fire and intensity throughout the duration of competitions, throughout every game. Because if they do that, then they're going to be a formidable opponent. But if they don't, then unfortunately they're going to be languishing in the positions that we see them now. But I wouldn't bet against them making a strong comeback. I don't know about whether there's a situation, whether it be financial. Are they unable to bring the caliber of player that they want to bring in? Do you know what I mean? Like, I don't know if that's hit them hard. Again, because it hasn't been a season that's been ongoing for a number of weeks, where you start to get a feel for groups, based on conversation you have with other players or other teams, in passing. You start to get a feel for what's really going on behind the scenes. I haven't had any of that. I don't know if you had, because of the condensed season. But yeah, I still think that this is going to end up being a bit of a blip, a little blot on the copy paper for them. And I'm hoping that they will return and, in the guise, in the more familiar, Stallion form that we're used to seeing. So fingers crossed that we see them in how they have been in previous years, because I do think that they belong more towards the top end of the table than where we're seeing them right now.
It's a scary proposition, Chris, because the rumblings of this tournament have been vast. They've spread out to potential clubs coming in, sponsors who are tuned in because they like what they're seeing. It's a package now that they can get behind, and they see that there is a community that is there and passionate about the game. That might bring out more competition, Chris, right? We might see some familiar names from the past come back and join the fray next season. We might see 9 teams next year. That is something that they really have to take on as a potentiality. And if these teams come into the league and overstep you again, then you're going to be fading away into nothingness, right? You're going to be irrelevant in the grand scheme of things. And that's not where Stallion want to be. And their fans and their loyal supporters definitely don't want them to slip away, right? And I'm worried about that, because I'd like to see Stallion do well next season. That is for sure. Yeah.
No, I understand where you're coming from. I think you touched on a really nice subject there, though, Jing, which is, I think, one of the key takeaways from this competition for me. You can almost take away the football in many respects. I think it's just great that we had something going, and props to Kokotori for getting the competition up and running, and all the guys that have worked underneath him to ensure that the competition went ahead. But for me, the biggest takeaway from this competition is the fact that we were able to generate this buzz. And like what we said last year with the SEA Games, where we were sort of questioning whether or not football was alive and well in the Philippines, because we do have a tendency to have this sort of roller coaster up and down relationship with football here in this country. But I think what we've seen is, as you've alluded to, games are being tuned into. You know, people are watching. The product that we are watching is much better. The clarity of the picture, the advertising boards around the stands, you know, the quality of the commentary, the action replays, all of this stuff has led to a better product that the Philippine football fans can enjoy. And if the football fans are enjoying it, as you said, it's going to attract other people to the product. And for me, that's the most important thing, because if we do start to get more people involved, that's how the league is going to grow. And if it continues to grow, then we are headed in the right direction, because we can't have any more years where it's going to be, have we got enough teams? Can we call someone up? Could he put a team in? You know, could you do us a favour and round up 20 guys so you can put a team? We can't have that anymore.
Yeah.
We can't have that anymore. Any more years like that, and unfortunately, you talk about Stallions being on the, then the whole competition is going to fall apart. So that for me has been the biggest takeaway, is that there definitely seems to be a buzz around the competition. It's reverberated throughout the football community. And if we can get to 8 teams next year, 9 teams, 10 teams next year, then it would have made this big sacrifice that people have put forth in this last month, 2, 3, 8 months throughout this lockdown period. It would have made it all worthwhile. And we can see some sort of light at the end of the tunnel. That for me is the biggest takeaway from this competition. And yeah, as I said, massive props to Coco Torre and his staff for putting this all together.
Perhaps this is where I can shed a little bit of insight onto how things transpired over the year, as I was somewhat inside, involved with Kaya. So I was there with the team meetings and the club meetings and figuring out how this was going to be put together. Back when this was still being molded from clay, I got an opportunity to sort of get into the minds of how they were thinking about it, right? And we alluded to the fact that we need to give credit to Coco, right? And it's well known that I grew up with him through the football community. When I got out of college, that was one of my first jobs, was working with Coco. So I'm a huge fan of what he's done and the journey that he's been on. But that aside, what he's done is extraordinary, right? And I think he's done it in a manner that is promising for the future, because what he's done is he's accomplished having the 6 teams collaborate, because it's impossible to put this together if the teams do not. So everybody has to work together on this one. And the key to that was having civil discourse on a regular basis in a manner in which he's always moving the ball forward. The progress is happening. There's going to be questions. There's going to be, how should you say, protests with how certain things are decided. There's going to be discussion, but the ball is always moving forward. And he's not afraid to have discussions because he is well-trained. He's gone through all the seminars and all the workshops that AFC can provide. He understands what is and isn't possible given the circumstances. So he knows how to operate within this environment. And all the clubs now understand that they're dealing with a competent entity, because there's no other way to accomplish what he did with everything, chess pieces moving in real time. Always. There's always going to be a new problem. There's a typhoon tomorrow. There has been a COVID detection here. The angle of the camera is not great. Everything is being, sponsorship, A-board allocations, broadcast dealings, 2 days, 3 days prior to the start of the competition, still not secured. Everybody's moving in real time and solving problems in real time. And what we saw was that if they can handle business in this kind of environment, the next season, they will be better prepared. And for the season after that, and for the season after that. So there's a culture that's being created in which there's a demand for something better, and we know the way to do that. And don't get too crazy. Don't throw criticisms our way if you can't back it up, because you're up against some guys who know what they're talking about. So it's interesting, and with the rumblings of more people wanting to be a part of this type of environment in which there's less volatility within the setup of the competition, then 9 teams, 10 teams, maybe. Then you're going to come back, Chris. You're going to get involved. It might be the time for you to get back into an exciting Philippine football setup. Always fresh and new, exciting personalities generate buzz, Chris. Maybe it's time to think about it.
It's the second time you brought it up. Are you trying to get me? What's going on here? Is this like a campaign that you're starting or what?
I want everybody to be back. I want everybody to come back.
Let's get the old band together. Is that your
I
theory here?
really think, Anton Del Rosario now, he's changed his tune. We haven't had a chance to speak about Maharlika yet, but they are a key to selling next year. In that this is a new club that has already surpassed expectations. And football clubs are more and more becoming platforms or vehicles to share shared values rather than just wins and losses, right? It's attaching yourself to an entity where you can ride highs and lows together because you believe in the value system that they stand for. And Maharlika has been very good at creating that vehicle and showing other clubs that this is how to do it. We might not have the pieces on the pitch. In fact, that is not our primary focus. Our primary focus is how can we impact a community? And I think beating Stallion, having that moment, that's enough. It's like they created magic, and that's what you need. As a club, you can see maybe the value of putting together a club is that it's not winning, trying to beat United City, because you look at that and like, how can I compete against that? I don't want to compete against that. I want to create crazy, intense storylines where I beat Mendiola or Stallion or whatever, right? And to be able to integrate individuals like MJ Libre who come from Tondo, or provide opportunities for the likes of Barbaso, David Basa, and Anton Del Rosario, a platform to continue to play even into the later years of their career. Anton has said that he wants the wheels to fall off now. Before he was like, you know what? My legs are not ready anymore. Or maybe I won't be able to compete at a high level. Now he wants to play for the passion of the game, right? And if he's competitive and he can still feel like he can hang, I want everybody back. Your brother next year, right? Wako is going to be back. Misak's going to be back. Maharlika is going to be extremely exciting next year. I think, the storyline and subplots are endless once more seasoned personalities and characters come back to the fray. So it just, with the storytelling capabilities now that are at disposal of the Philippine football community, there could be some very exciting and interesting stories to get behind. That's me.
Okay.
Roundabout way of saying come back.
That was your sales pitch. It was okay. I'm not sure if I'll buy it yet. It's not bad. Yeah. I think with that, just what you mentioned there about Maharlika, I'm glad you gave them a mention. Let's not be silly about this. They were 1 point away from potentially qualifying for an AFC Cup spot.
Yes.
You know what I mean? So I think that's a great, unique selling point for anyone looking to invest in it. Someone like Anton Del Rosario has put together a team. That in itself is ridiculous, right? You don't have to be a rocket scientist to put a team together. That's what you've learned from that. And also, okay, look, they had a couple of blowouts, but I think you alluded to it before. Formula One has its subplots. If you're the team that's in the constructor that's in 4th place or 5th place, you can still be competitive. Do you know what I mean? You still have to run your own race and compete against the constructor that's in 3rd or 4th or 5th or whatever. Do you know what I mean? So like you said, those little subplots are nice. I don't think we should all necessarily be looking at it from a perspective of we need to be trying to challenge for Champions Leagues. Because in reality, at the moment, it's only really 2 teams that are probably thinking about that. Actually, I'm being honest, and really deep down believe that they should be competing or aspiring to compete at that level. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. So everyone else is trying to compete for something else. And like you said, I think it's nice that Maharlika have come in and given their platform, and it isn't necessarily to go and qualify for AFC. Although that would be nice. You've got to try and perform as best as you can on the pitch. And it almost got them to that point. Let's be honest. It's almost got to a position where they might potentially qualify for an AFC Cup spot. But yeah, definitely for me, it's important that we try to continue to create that buzz and get people involved. The one thing I would like to see from your friend Coco, though, is I'd like to have him more visible. That's my take, and I've told him this to his face, so I'm calling him out publicly. I'd love to hear him share his ideas, you know what I mean? Because I think he's quite active on Facebook and stuff. I saw someone post asking today for like a UFL all-star team type scenario last time, and he's quite quick to go, yeah, well, I was on that campaign, I did that, and I was like, all right, Coco, calm down, relax. I don't think they were trying to call anyone out, but then he answered with, it's in the pipeline. Do you know what I mean? I think I'd love to hear, it doesn't have to be on our podcast, it doesn't have to be on our platform, but I would love to hear his ideas, because I think if he could, there's only so much he can share. He can't share everything. I totally understand that. But I think he's someone who is articulate. He has brilliant ideas. And I think for not just the fans, but for prospective clubs and prospective sponsors to want to get on board, it'd be great to have him share some of his visions. I think, you know, he could be I was going to say Howard Stern there, but David Stern. He could be the sort of the David Stern of the Philippines. You know, I think he's got that capability, because he's already shown his competency. There's no question. He's let his work do the talking. But I would also like to hear him share some of his ideas with the broader football public. I think that would also go a long way in sort of fostering and stoking that fire for the domestic game. What do you think?
Yeah, 100%. I think it's going to be inevitable. He needs to be out there more often to provide sort of the direction of the league, that everybody can get behind it. Because now you're seeing that, you know, although there are people who are fans and supporters of specific clubs, I think in general what you're seeing is that there is a support for the league. There's a lot of people who have just been watching the games, you know, and I've been doing that as well, you know, where I don't want to watch the games with a Kaya lens specifically, because you lose out on all the other things that football can offer, right? When you're watching it with a neutral eye. And you get to train that by watching other teams play, right? It's hard to appreciate United City when they're battering your team 7-1. It's easy to be able to be like, wow, that passing was incredible, when it's somebody else, right? And I think that's what, with the games being entertaining, that's the key thing there. Not only palatable, but entertaining. I want to spend an hour and a half of my life watching how Mendiola does against ADT today, because I'm interested. And the game is fun. And that's it, right? So that's what's key there. And if your product is that, then people can get on board. And I think there were a lot of new fans that were turned into, spectators of football. I personally, from the Kaya account myself, I've witnessed people sending in videos of like their support and stuff like that. And I'm like, hey, I'm a new fan. I watched you guys for the first time. And man, I was really entertained. So I've been watching all the games. What? That never used to happen, right? So that's, I guess, one of the more exciting things as well. Sidelf Tupas doing a great job putting together the broadcast team and understanding that worst comes to worst, if there's nobody that wants to come and shoot us, we can shoot ourselves. And we can do good things by shooting ourselves, because we know the storylines, we know who to focus. The commentators are all friends and understanding of what storylines need to be discussed or are overly discussed and under discussed. So I think it's an opportunity for, as I said previously in a previous episode, is sort of our community just kind of rallying around one another and showcasing our competency, because now you're being put in the spotlight and it's time to kind of like, hey, all of our heads are sticking out. Either you show up and do your job, or you're going to get found out pretty quick. And because it's an exciting industry now, there's a lot of individuals who are looking in and like, I want to get involved. Some of the videos that were created in that bubble were created by multimedia art students who are not football fans at all, but participated in the league, and they're like, wow, there's so many great stories here. I want to do more football stuff. When those good creative individuals start entering your field and start creating stories for neutrals, not just for club fans, this is when it becomes more mainstream and the stories become more emotionally, how should you say, connected to the general public. And I think that's what's going to happen here. A more marketing, media-centric approach for next year. Explosive personalities like Stefan Schrock, Anton Del Rosario, the folks of Maharlika, and the individuals from Kaya and the other clubs. Man, it's going to be very, very exciting. So at this time, I think there's a wave brewing, right? And it's a promising looking wave right now. But I mean, let's not get ahead of ourselves, right? It's been one league. It's been 5 games per club, right? But it's like, whoa, there's a wave coming. And now there's a window here where a lot of people are kind of like, is it time? Is it time for us to paddle for this? Is it time for us to get back on board with Philippine football? And I think if the PFL and the PFF play their cards right, they can convince a lot of people that this is the one to go for. I think so.
Yeah, and that would be great. That's all we want, isn't it? That's all we want. And from the get-go, we talked about we want to have a more sustainable league, one that's viable, that has longevity, and can provide opportunities for players, for fans to enjoy this game. So, no, I totally agree with you, Jing. I think it's been a great advert for the local game, and fingers crossed we can just continue to ride this wave, using your surfing analogy, but hoping that it continues to grow. But it's been fun. It's been really fun, Jing. I've really enjoyed it. Disappointed that it's ended so quickly, but a lot to look forward to now, and hopefully, fingers crossed, we can get to see some of these teams compete in the AFC Cup, the AFC Champions League next year, depending on how that whole thing turns out. That's another podcast altogether, obviously. No, just in review, it's been a really fun few weeks to watch this competition, and really, really enjoyed it.
Yeah, 2 weeks of madness for the Philippine football community, but it was well worth it, and it was so much fun to be a part of. We hope you enjoyed our opportunity to sort of look back and discuss it. If you did, then we hope you are subscribed to our YouTube channel. If not, you should get to doing that. It's very easy. It's one click on our YouTube page. Please do that to help us out, get the word to more people who might be interested in football matters in the Philippines. We are also on Spotify, and we're on Apple Podcasts. Look for us there. And we're on Facebook, Instagram, and on Twitter. It's been tremendous, Chris. I enjoyed that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Good to see you again.
All right, guys. Catch you next time for more Philippine football discussions here on Across the Line. Catch you on the next Football Friday.